there exists a knowledge capable of radically altering a person's perception of reality, forcing them to question truths that once seemed unshakable throughout their life. Perhaps many have never considered it, but deep within every individual lies something that has always been present, an invisible, hidden energy akin to an inner fire or an inexhaustible source of power. However, instead of being purposefully utilized, this potential might has been constantly dispersed, depleted, and squandered on fleeting pleasures and superficial pursuits, effectively nullified before ever reaching its true, grand purpose. It is only when an individual, as if chosen, consciously ceases to waste their vital energy on instant, momentary gratification, when they abandon habitual yet destructive actions, that something truly extraordinary begins to unfold, opening a path to unexplored horizons. This transformative process is not instantaneous. There is no magic button to press that will immediately change everything. Initially, the individual feels only a pervasive discomfort, an inexplicable unease whose source remains entirely unknown, as if something powerful within them is desperately trying to break free but cannot find a suitable outlet. It is at this critical, initial moment that the vast majority of people retreat, unable to withstand the escalating inner tension. They fail to grasp the true nature of what is happening, mistakenly interpreting their sensations as mere frustration, trivial anxiety, or a natural impulse that, in their view, must be immediately released. But the truth to be revealed is far deeper. What a person feels during this pivotal period is not desire itself, but a powerful resistance to the profound, fundamental changes that are about to occur in their existence. The human mind instinctively clings to the familiar, to the established beliefs it has been conditioned to accept. However, if an individual can resist this first, often automatic impulse, if they consciously choose to remain in this inner fire without immediately seeking an escape, that is when the genuine transformation of their being begins. Few truly grasp the depth and scale of what happens within a person when they stop unconsciously squandering their life energy. It is as if consciousness awakens from years of stupor, from a state of deep inertia. Suddenly, thoughts gain astonishing clarity, perception of the surrounding world undergoes radical changes, and consciousness itself noticeably expands. This is neither witchcraft nor mere superstition. Rather, it is the natural outcome of a process largely forgotten by humanity, yet one that has existed and operated since the dawn of time. The energy that was previously aimlessly dispersed begins to concentrate and accumulate. Within the person, and with this inner accumulation, come profound questions they never dared to ask themselves before. For example, why did I constantly feel this insatiable need? Why does the pursuit of something seem to control so many aspects of my life? Who was I before my mind was conditioned to seek pleasure as an end in itself, becoming its slave? There are questions that are inherently uncomfortable, ones that few dare to answer, yet once a person begins to ponder them, there is no turning back. They cross an invisible threshold, reaching a point of no return where they can no longer simply ignore their inner experiences. Something intangible awakens deep within them, and though it cannot be put into words, its presence is distinctly felt. It is like an ancient echo from the depths of their being, a call that previously remained unheard, constantly drowned out by countless external distractions. Modern society, as a rule, does not instruct individuals on preserving their inner energy, nor does it reveal their true power or potential for self-transformation. On the contrary, it encourages the wasteful expenditure of this energy, urging people to dissipate it as quickly as possible. Individuals are convinced that such behavior is normal, a sign of health, an integral part of human existence. But if this dogma were an absolute truth, why does a part of them continue to feel that there is something more beyond the visible? Why does a persistent inner voice whisper that perhaps the conventional viewpoint distorts reality? The answer lies in the fact that commonly accepted assertions do not represent the full and exhaustive truth. Energy is not merely a biological impulse, but a powerful force. This force possesses a dual potential. It can be directed towards both destruction and creation. When it is spent unconsciously, thoughtlessly, it is swiftly depleted, resulting in fleeting satisfaction and transforming into a gaping void that nothing can fill. However, when this inner energy is carefully preserved, when it undergoes a kind of purification and is purposefully directed in accordance with a clear intention, it transforms into something far greater. It takes the form of absolute clarity of thought, profound vision, and genuine power. This is not about power over others, but about inner strength, an unparalleled self-mastery that the vast majority of people will never know. It is at this moment that a person begins to perceive the first signs of deep change. Initially, these transformations are barely noticeable. A constant influx of energy appears that was previously absent, concentration becomes significantly sharper, and willpower gains unyielding strength. Over time, however, these metamorphoses become so obvious that they simply cannot be ignored. It is as if a veil falls from the eyes, and for the first time, a person begins to perceive the world as it truly is, without distortion. What previously seemed ordinary and normal now appears desolate and meaningless. What once captivated and entertained now seems utterly irrelevant and superficial. Conversely, things that were previously overlooked begin to acquire colossal significance that the person had never before considered. A moment arrives when many people face a deep internal conflict. This happens because they are no longer able to fit into their former reality. Their perception of life changes irreversibly. Such a state is undoubtedly accompanied by discomfort, but simultaneously it grants true freedom. For the first time, a person feels that they are gaining control not over the external world, but over themselves, over their mind, their energy, and consequently, their destiny. This is where the true test lies. When an individual reaches this turning point, the surrounding world, like a powerful vortex, tries to pull them back. They will be persistently told that they are exaggerating, that it is just a temporary phase, that all their actions are meaningless. One will observe how society stubbornly tries to normalize what the person now clearly perceives as absolutely abnormal. For their very existence, their conscious choice becomes a direct threat to the established system that seeks to hold individuals in invisible chains. But the key question is, will they retreat? Will they allow themselves to ignore the profound feeling, the true knowledge that has awakened within their soul, merely to squeeze back into an outdated mold that has long ceased to reflect their true essence? The path of those who dare to go against the current has never been easy. It is not a road of tranquility or serene existence. Rather, it is a path of constant confrontation with the external world and internal contradictions, a path of deep doubts leading to re-evaluation and ultimately to the complete rebirth of the personality. For when a person consciously decides to retain their vital energy within themselves, not allowing it to scatter uncontrollably into empty external stimuli, they effectively restore their inherent power. A power that has always belonged to them by right of birth, but whose existence they, unfortunately, forgot in the whirlwind of daily life. Such a transformation radically changes the accustomed worldview, as suddenly the world ceases to be perceived as a space where one merely passively responds to external events. The individual stops being a rudderless boat, aimlessly drifting in the vast ocean of fleeting impulses and momentary desires. Now they become the captain of their own vessel, firmly holding the helm in their hands. This is a feeling of deep inner authority and responsibility that only a few individuals experience throughout their lives. A natural question arises: is a specific person destined to be among these chosen few? There is no need to give an immediate answer. There is no need to grasp the full depth of this concept right now. It is enough to simply allow this idea to take root in one's consciousness. If ever, deep within, a person felt the presence of some hidden potential, something greater than visible reality. If they ever suspected that they were unconsciously wasting a part of their inner strength, then perhaps in this new approach lies something that is definitely worth exploring. It is highly probable that the true aspiration, what the individual has so diligently sought is not external, not in fleeting pleasures, not in external validation of their own worth, not in the immediate gratification of superficial desires. Perhaps what they sought has always resided within them, patiently awaiting the fateful moment when they decide to turn inward and recognize the true essence of this hidden treasure. Such an awareness represents merely the starting point on an entirely new path. Something profound has already undergone transformation within the person, though they may be unable to articulate it. This change is not something that others can easily notice or understand, yet the individual distinctly feels its presence. It is as if an inner fire has been rekindled and reignited, and contrary to previous patterns where such a flame typically extinguished, it now continues to burn, emitting a constant, unceasing light. This energy does not dissipate, does not crumble into nothing, does not dissolve into the abyss of automatic reflexes, and it is at this moment that a person begins to notice something that previously escaped their attention. The life force, which previously vanished without a trace, now accumulates within them in a way previously unknown. Society never instructed the individual on how to manage this power. It only taught them to waste it, to expend it as quickly as possible, avoiding prolonged retention, for, as they were told, it was unnatural, detrimental to health, and outside the norm. But if that were the true path, why do they now feel an inner awakening? Why now, with this energy retained, do they begin to observe transformations previously unimaginable? This is neither punishment nor delusion. It is a clear sign that for the first time in their life, the individual is beginning to gain genuine control over themselves. The changes are initially almost imperceptible. Others, looking at them, sense the presence of something different, though they cannot precisely define its nature. Their voice gains greater conviction, and their posture becomes firmer. This is not a display of arrogance or haughtiness, but merely evidence of the absence of former fragility, sometimes hidden as weakness. It is the manifestation of an inner strength that was previously fragmented, but has now found a single, focused center within the person. Remarkably, this energy encompasses not only the physical dimension, but also the mental and spiritual essence of the individual. This power, like a sleeping giant, lay dormant for many years, awaiting its awakening, the moment a person stops unconsciously expending it outwardly into the world. When an individual embarks on the conscious accumulation of this life force, fundamental changes occur in the perception and manifestation of desire. It no longer resembles an untamed flame, mindlessly sweeping one along, depriving them of choice. It is no longer an invisible force subjugating a person's will without their knowledge or consent. Now, this energy does not dominate the person. On the contrary, the person gains complete control over it. And it is in this acquired mastery and dominion over one's own energy that horizons inaccessible to most are revealed. This energy is not merely a source of pleasure, but also a colossal transformative force. Few are truly capable of comprehending the true meaning and profound significance of this energy. It is a common misconception that its purpose is solely limited to momentary gratification, instant pleasure, or immediate relief. However, such a view encompasses only a tiny fraction of its true potential. In essence, this energy is identical to the fundamental force that propels life itself, that stimulates the creative process, shapes vision, and effects deep transformations. It is the very spark that ignites the flame of art, that fuels ambition and allows grand designs to be brought to reality. And if a person is endowed with the ability to generate life using this energy, then a natural question arises: what will happen if an individual learns to purposefully direct this power towards other goals? It is no coincidence that when a person ceases to unconsciously expend their life energy, their consciousness begins to function in an entirely different way. Distractions lose their former appeal. What was previously perceived as an inevitable and urgent need now appears as merely a superficial game, participation in which no longer evokes any interest. And the most striking aspect of this transformation is a manifold increase in the ability to focus. Concentration ceases to be a painful effort. The need to force oneself to complete tasks disappears. The mind, now freed from constant fluctuations between momentary desires, and their gratification becomes a precise, sharp, and unwavering instrument. However, something even deeper is hidden within this process. It is something that cannot be seen with the eyes, but that begins to be felt with every fiber of one's being. This refers to the sensation of presence. Previously, a person lived in a state of continuous distraction. Their thoughts haphazardly darted from one idea to another, constantly searching for something, perpetually feeling a need for something more. But now, for the first time, they realize they are here and now, whole, without any sense of lack, without the anxiety associated with seeking externally what has long resided within them. When an individual reaches this special point of inner transformation, they begin to recognize the existence of an entirely different kind of attraction. This is not the superficial attractiveness based on external appearance, fleeting temptation, or the constant need for external approval. The essence of this phenomenon lies much deeper. It is true magnetism. It arises not because a person actively seeks or strives for it, but because the energy previously unconsciously scattered into the external world is now fully concentrated and integrated within them. Such a state can be compared to the difference between a faint flicker and a powerful, unyielding flame burning with unwavering intensity. And those around them instinctively feel this, even if they find it difficult to explain this inexplicable attraction. However, this newfound strength is not merely about how others perceive them, nor is it aimed at making the individual appear stronger, more attractive, or more confident. Its true purpose lies within the person themselves, in what they are now capable of creating, producing, and bringing to life. For the energy that previously vanished without a trace is now available for far more significant purposes, for active creation, for continuous personal growth, for becoming precisely who the individual has always felt destined to be in the depths of their soul. This is where the real test arises, for with this powerful force, with this concentrated energy now contained within a person, comes immense responsibility. The individual can no longer continue to live as before. They are not permitted to move through life without clear intention, nor can they simply succumb to fleeting impulses without questioning where they ultimately lead. From now on, every action gains significance. Every thought, every decision made, every current moment is filled with deep meaning. This is because by knowing how to conserve and direct their life energy, a person realizes that all their actions are not a waste, but an investment. In such a paradigm, losses cease. On the contrary, a process of accumulation, creation, and systematic building begins. Society, as a rule, remains silent about this truth because an individual capable of retaining their inner energy, purposefully directing their own will, and becoming the sovereign master of their being, represents an individual beyond external control. They no longer require artificial distractions to mask or fill an inner void. They do not seek external approval, for they deeply understand their true essence. They do not succumb to momentary urges or fleeting impulses because their thinking remains crystal clear, highly focused, and extraordinarily sharp. It is in this unique state of being that a person gains something previously unknown. They discover true freedom. This is not the illusory freedom often presented by society, a pseudo-freedom allowing one to act on any whim, at any moment, without regard for possible consequences. On the contrary, a true, genuine freedom is discovered. It is the freedom to be who one chooses to be, without the influence of external forces pulling them in an undesired direction, without any chains binding their potential. It is the freedom to live consciously, with deep intention, to move forward with a clear purpose, directing one's life precisely where they sincerely wish. When a subject reaches this unique point of awareness, a deep and piercing question inevitably arises in their consciousness. If such significant changes have occurred merely by purposefully conserving inner energy, then how far do the boundaries of their possibilities extend? If the person they were just a few weeks ago has already undergone such a striking transformation, what horizons can they master in a few months, in a year? How far does the path of this transformation extend? The answer to these questions lies within the person themselves. This answer has always been present in their depths, but now they gain the ability to perceive it. For now, for the first time in a long time, they are not looking at the world through the distorting prism of momentary desires, obsessive needs, or distracting scatteredness. Now their vision is endowed with true clarity, and in this clarity, something truly transformative is revealed to them. They always possessed incomparably greater potential than they supposed, and power always lay hidden within them. They simply needed to awaken and reclaim it. However, this is merely the prelude to deeper changes. Something amazing begins to manifest when the subject consciously deviates from the well-trodden path followed by the majority. This does not happen suddenly, not as a result of some overwhelming event that could clearly divide their life into before and after, but through a subtle internal transformation that only they themselves can feel. It is as if a thin, weightless veil, which had enveloped their vision, gradually begins to thin and tear, revealing the very reality that has always existed, but which they previously did not allow themselves to recognize and accept. Initially, they may mistakenly believe that they themselves have changed, that something different has been born within them, but over time a deep understanding comes to them. It is not they who have transformed, but their fundamental perception of the surrounding world. At a certain stage of life, conversations that previously seemed ordinary and meaningful suddenly begin to feel hollow and empty. Stimuli that once served as distractions and captivated the individual's attention gradually lose their appeal, ceasing to entice with their apparent significance. Social dynamics that were previously accepted unquestioningly and without doubt now take on characteristics of absurdity, appearing as artificial constructs, skillfully created backdrops designed to keep the masses in an endless cycle of daily life. And it is at this pivotal moment that what was previously hidden is revealed to the person: deep programming, conditioned reflexes, and how every aspect of societal structure was built to maintain the alienation of individuals from their true essence. Certain internal urges, all kinds of temptations, and an insatiable desire for external approval, all of this was used as a means to keep the focus of the masses directed outward rather than inward. And now this revelation is perceived with unprecedented clarity. These impulses, once seemingly natural and uncontrollable, an inherent trait of human existence, now appear in a completely different light. However, as soon as a person stops feeding this imposed programming, they begin to recognize their foreignness. It becomes obvious that these were installed ideas, forced desires, artificially constructed needs, created with the sole purpose of ensuring that the individual never achieved full self-mastery and never became the true owner of their inner world. At this point, the individual's inner struggle intensifies, for when a person begins to see what was previously hidden, when they grasp the true nature of their surroundings, the world does not let go so easily. One cannot simply awaken and expect the path to be paved with tranquility. The system in which such a person existed does not tolerate anyone daring to break its invisible chains. And if they attempt to do so, it will exert every effort to pull them back into its familiar confines. It does not resort to overt violence or direct threats, but uses the methods that have always been its arsenal: sophisticated manipulation of consciousness, immense pressure from collective opinion, and the pervasive fear of being rejected. It is at this stage that many fail. They have managed to advance so far, felt a deep inner transformation, seen an unpalatable truth, yet the overwhelming fear of loneliness forces them to retreat. It seems easier for them to fit back into familiar patterns, more comfortable to return to so-called normal life, less painful to follow the path that the majority takes. But if a person succumbs to this temptation, if they take even one step back, everything that has been built and gained within them will begin to irrevocably crumble. For once the truth has been seen, it is impossible to unlearn it. One can pretend that nothing has changed. One can temporarily deceive oneself with endless distractions and fleeting pleasures, but deep down, the person will know exactly that they have betrayed themselves, and there is no heavier punishment than the awareness of this. Many people often do not realize that true transformation goes far beyond simply abstaining from certain habitual actions. This profound change, in essence, concerns a fundamental break from the bonds of dependence, a complete cessation of fruitless attempts to find in the external world what inherently resides within their own being. It is about gaining sovereign control over one's own mind, over the inexhaustible reserves of personal energy, over the very fabric of their existence. When an individual takes this step, when they cease to act according to generally accepted, predetermined rules, they inevitably become a problem for the existing system. It is crucial for the system that the individual remains in a state of mental stupor, that they constantly consume, and that they remain perpetually dependent on external stimuli and attributes for a sense of completeness. The moment a person decides they no longer need any of this, they become unpredictable, an ungovernable force, a truly free being. The real question for everyone is, are they ready for what follows? Because awakening, in essence, is only the first, albeit monumental, step on this path. While realizing the truth might not be easy, it is even harder to constantly maintain that awareness and live in accordance with it. For at the very instant, a person comprehends how the world around them is structured, when they see how subtly and skillfully all systems have been designed to keep them in a state of voluntary captivity, they are inevitably faced with a momentous decision. This decision can radically alter the entire course of their future existence. Either they press forward relentlessly, despite any obstacles and the possibility of having to leave behind familiar illusions and comfort, or they capitulate to the challenges and return to the deceptive comfort of ignorance. It is at this pivotal moment that the individual discovers their true essence. When a person consciously chooses the difficult path, when they firmly decide not to succumb to retrospective doubts, regardless of any circumstances, they begin to grasp something far more fundamental, a phenomenon unknown to most. They realize that within their depths lies a power previously unfelt, an unshakable presence, an inner conviction that is independent of external factors and circumstances. This state transcends mere energy accumulation, going beyond heightened concentration or mental clarity. It is something significantly more comprehensive. This power, however, is fundamentally different from the kind of strength most people strive for. It is not a form of domination, does not involve control over others, or a desire for superiority. Its nature is entirely unique. It is the embodiment of the ability to move through life's trials, free from the bonds of fear, a sense of need, or inner emptiness. It is the quintessence of absolute self-sufficiency, an unwavering conviction that all necessary resources and answers reside within oneself. This form of strength cannot be bought, it cannot be falsified, and it certainly cannot be stolen. It is the true power of one who has managed to master and order their own mind, becoming its true owner. It is at this moment that a fundamental transformation occurs for the world around, without verbalizing or rationally realizing it. Unmistakably senses and recognizes this inner strength. Others unfailingly perceive something extraordinary, even if they cannot rationally explain it. There is a unique distinctiveness in their gaze, in their manner of conversation, in their movements, which sets them apart from the crowd. And this unique difference evokes genuine admiration in many, but at the same time it generates fear in others. The reason lies in the fact that when an individual attains true freedom, when they break free from the bonds of societal norms and expectations, they transform into a kind of mirror, silently reflecting back to others all the unpleasant truths they have diligently turned away from within themselves. Some, confronted by this reflection, will feel profound inspiration and a desire for change. Others, however, will experience a burning aversion. And this feeling of aversion arises not because of their specific actions or words, but simply because their very being challenges and shatters the illusory reality in which they have existed throughout their lives. Consequently, the path of one who chooses this unique journey is not accessible to everyone. It is not a road to universal approval or thunderous applause. On the contrary, it is a path full of incessant trials, internal conflicts, and external opposition, which only those with an unbreakable will and true resolve can overcome. However, if they manage to endure, if they remain unwavering in pursuing their goal, despite any obstacles the world may erect in their path, then they will achieve what only a select few experience in this life: absolute, genuine freedom. True freedom, in its authentic manifestation, is not a destination. It is not some final state where one day a person wakes up and all questions of their existence are resolved. On the contrary, freedom is an endless process of choice, a continuous act of will. It embodies the courage to look the world directly in the face and firmly declare, "I will not be controlled. I will not be part of this game. I will not surrender my inner power to anything or anyone." And such a realization is not the end of the journey. It is merely the prelude to something immeasurably greater. Something within the individual has changed them irreversibly. This is not a fleeting sensation, not an ephemeral experience that can dissipate over time. It is a deep conviction, rooted in the very core of their being. The person is no longer able to return to their former self, for the road back has simply vanished. What once limited them now holds no power over them. What once distracted their attention has lost its grip. And in this new-found emptiness, in this space where chaos and noise once dominated, something entirely new begins to emerge, a previously unknown energy, as well as a purpose that, until this moment, remained hidden. The flame that ignited within has not died down. On the contrary, it has flared up with renewed intensity, becoming purer, more profound, and utterly impossible to ignore. And with this flame comes a feeling never before experienced with such clarity, an urgent, irresistible need to create. The individual must abandon passive consumption, not squander precious time on aimless distractions. Their true purpose is to build something authentic, something that transcends the mundane, something that serves as a vivid reflection of the inner power awakened within them. When an individual ceases to unconsciously squander their energies, this energy does not vanish without a trace. Instead, it transforms, and now, instead of aimlessly dissipating, it strives to find a new direction. The desire that once reigned supreme over the person, drawing them along and preventing true awareness, has now undergone a radical change. It is no longer limited to a primitive physical impulse. It has transformed into a powerful creative force, an urgent need to manifest something far transcending individual boundaries. It is at this pivotal moment that they begin to grasp a profound truth that has always been present in their being, but remained entirely uncomprehended. A person's life journey was never meant for mere survival. Their presence here is not for passive existence, not for the endless reproduction of the same behavioral patterns until the end of their allotted time. A person is called to purposefully use this awakened energy, to channel it into a creative flow, transforming it into something capable of leaving an indelible mark in the annals of creation. However, such a state cannot be forced. It is not an ultimate goal that can be forcibly implanted into consciousness solely through rational thought. On the contrary, it is an organic process that unfolds on its own when inner chaos and restlessness subside, and life energy, previously squandered on familiar, ineffective patterns, begins to actively seek new, more productive directions. As this process develops, all aspects of existence begin to align harmoniously. The individual's mental clarity significantly increases, and their intuitive perception of the world sharpens to an extraordinary degree. Concepts and ideas that previously seemed utterly unattainable or incomprehensible now emerge with striking clarity. This happens not because external reality has changed, but because the person themselves has transformed. For it is at this moment, for the first time in their life, that a person gains true control over their own inner energy, and with it, over the shaping of their unique destiny. It is at this critical stage that many people encounter serious obstacles and suffer setbacks. When inner energy reaches its peak, and the irresistible urge to create becomes almost unbearable, the human mind often seeks the path of least resistance. It tends to choose the most obvious solutions, clinging to familiar patterns and concepts, striving to fill the emerging void with anything without considering the authenticity or alignment of these choices with the true needs of the soul. However, an individual who has reached this stage has no right to make such a blunder. Not after all the revelations they have experienced, not after all the profound feelings they have felt. If a person has come so far, if they have withstood the onslaught of the external world and its conventions, it indicates the presence of a deep knowledge within them that does not allow them to be satisfied with the familiar and mediocre. The energy now at one's disposal is an invaluable gift, but also an unshakable responsibility. It should not be spent on idle or meaningless pursuits. It is unacceptable to squander its potential on dead-end paths leading nowhere. It must not be allowed to dissolve into empty ventures whose sole purpose is merely to fill the void of time. On the contrary, this vital force must be directed towards truly significant goals, towards challenges that can stimulate personal growth, urging the individual towards continuous development, self-improvement, and becoming the unique person they are destined to be. In this regard, a fundamental question inevitably arises: where should this powerful flow of energy be directed? There is no universal solution or definitive answer. There is no ready-made map or clear route that everyone can follow. No one from outside can precisely point a person to their true purpose, because this ultimate goal is something each individual must discover solely for themselves. It is not found in the external world. It is not determined by the expectations or demands of others. On the contrary, it is hidden deep within, in the most secluded corners of the human being, patiently awaiting the moment when a person has the courage to listen to its call. However, there are certain signs, subtle indications. There are moments when life itself fleetingly lifts the veil, revealing glimpses of what truly inspires and drives a person. Moments arise when one experiences deep, undeniable emotions that cannot be ignored, a sense of overwhelming certainty, as if for a brief moment everything around them acquires ultimate and clear meaning. These special moments that sometimes occur in life are by no means simple coincidences or mere circumstances. Rather, they should be perceived as profound messages, as silent calls intended to show a person the right path. They serve as invisible lighthouses, demonstrating in which direction one should purposefully channel their energy. Unfortunately, a significant portion of society tends to disregard these important signs. People often sense their presence, but instead of listening, they prefer to dismiss these intuitive nudges, striving to rationalize them, find all sorts of excuses, or simply hide behind the veil of their own fears. The reason for such behavior lies in the fact that following these inner promptings requires considerable courage, for it means resolutely leaving the zone of familiar safety, the known and predictable, to venture into the unknown. But if a person has already come a certain distance, if they have learned what it means to hold on to this inner strength or intuition, then they realize ignoring these signs further is simply impossible. It becomes evident that the inner voice, once whispering, will no longer be silent, demanding attention to its guidance. It is then, when the individual begins to purposefully follow these inner promptings, that something truly incredible happens. The energy they have accumulated, perhaps dormant or inefficiently spent until now, begins to move in an entirely new, unprecedented way. The person ceases to feel like a fighter, constantly swimming against the current of life. The obsessive feeling that every action requires exhausting and continuous effort disappears. On the contrary, a sensation arises as if all aspects of existence are harmoniously aligning. Opportunities begin to appear precisely when they are most relevant, and the necessary people enter one's life exactly when their presence is most desired and beneficial. This happens not because external forces are doing the work for the person, but because the individual is now in harmony with their true essence. It is a consequence of directing their inner power exactly as it always should have been. However, this does not mean that the path will be strewn with roses. No one guarantees that everything will unfold unimpeded, without difficulties, without moments of uncertainty. The significant difference is that these obstacles are no longer insurmountable barriers capable of halting progress. Instead of serving as hindrances, they transform into catalysts for strengthening resolve, stimulating the acquisition of new skills, and pushing one to achieve previously unseen heights of self-improvement that once seemed unattainable. It is at this pivotal moment that many begin to realize that true purpose is not something fixed. It is not a final destination on a journey upon reaching which all problems miraculously disappear. On the contrary, it is a dynamic, continuously evolving process, something that is shaped day by day through every action, every choice, every thought. And the only way to remain true to this direction is through tireless forward movement, through carefully listening to the inner voice, and through constantly allowing one's energy to flow unimpeded on the right course. What once manifested as a series of uncontrolled impulses has now transformed into a powerful driving force, propelling the individual forward. The former emptiness, which one futilely tried to fill with external attributes, now reveals itself as an inexhaustible source of creative energy and inner power. The most remarkable thing is that there is no longer a need for external stimuli to feel complete. The realization now comes: everything the person tirelessly sought externally has always resided within them. All that was required was genuine courage to look into the depths of their own being and rediscover this inner essence. However, this moment is not the end of the journey. It is merely the starting point, the beginning of the true unveiling of genuine abilities. The individual is only just lifting the veil on what a truly purposeful life actually means. And what lies ahead surpasses all expectations. For at the very moment it seems that the limit of possibilities has been reached, when all visible horizons appear to have been explored, existence invariably demonstrates that there is an immeasurably deeper level of understanding. A new, more complex challenge always arises, and a new, previously unattainable level of inner strength invariably awaits discovery. The only question that remains unanswered is one ready to continue on this path? A fundamental transformation occurs in the way reality is perceived. This is not a fleeting, transient change, and certainly not a clever trick of the mind, a figment of imagination. Rather, it is a profound, comprehensive adjustment of how the individual understands the flow of time, senses energy, and recognizes their inseparable connection to everything around them. This state can be compared to how one might have previously been in a kind of somnambulistic sleep, but now, for the first time in their life, they have fully awakened to true being. In those aspects of existence that previously remained vague and without definite form, an astonishing clarity has now emerged, and in moments previously overlooked, an unexpected depth has been discovered. What once seemed to be a fragmented, disjointed existence is now perceived as a unified, continuous flow filled with deep meaning and clear purpose. The individual is not always able to precisely explain when this internal shift occurred, but they undoubtedly realize something within them has come into harmony with a comprehensive, more powerful force. It is at this significant moment that a person begins to understand that the surrounding world is perceived not only by the familiar physical senses. There is something more, some dimension, that has always been present in reality, but only now becomes accessible to their clear and distinct perception. This is not about mystical visions, supernatural phenomena, or esoteric revelations, but rather about the formation of a deeper, authentic connection with reality itself. One begins to sense the emotions of others without waiting for them to be verbally expressed, to anticipate impending events long before their actual occurrence, and to notice subtle signs that would have previously been completely ignored by their consciousness. It gives the impression that the universe was constantly engaging in dialogue, but only now does the individual possess the true ability to understand and interpret it. Such a phenomenon is neither a random coincidence nor the result of a placebo effect. It is a natural, logical consequence of the consistent accumulation and purposeful direction of inner energy. In contrast, during the preceding period, every external impulse completely captivated the person. Every fleeting desire entirely consumed their attention and strength, and any distraction invariably pushed them away from their own true self, creating a sense of disconnectedness and inner fragmentation. This energy, previously aimlessly dispersed, has now concentrated within the person, forming something denser, more stable, and more powerful. With the attainment of this inner stability, the perception of existence inevitably changes. Thinking gains extraordinary sharpness. Thoughts are no longer a chaotic stream, but become precise instruments that can be used purposefully. The person is no longer at the mercy of automatic patterns. Now they can consciously shape their thoughts, manage their emotions, and direct their creative energy. Through this newfound control, one discovers something that always existed but remained hidden in the shadow of disorder, the ability to shape their own reality. For reality has never been an unchanging constant. It was never something that just happened on its own. On the contrary, it always responded to the energetic projections emanating from the person, yet they never realized this fundamental principle because they were excessively distracted by external stimuli, internally fragmented and energetically dispersed. Now that their inner energy is collected, now that their consciousness has gained clear focus, the person can clearly trace the direct correlation between their mental processes and the events unfolding in their environment. They understand that in this new world order, there is no room for coincidences. Every person who appears on their life path, every opportunity presented, every obstacle encountered, it is a direct response to the energetic vibration they constantly emit. When a person grasps this truth, their former way of life becomes impossible. They are no longer capable of thoughtlessly squandering their energy without considering the potential consequences. Negative thoughts cease to be uncontrolled. Now they clearly understand how these thoughts shape the reality they attract into their life. Life on autopilot ceases, for a deep understanding emerges that every decision is a conscious act of creation. At this stage, many people often stop, and the reason is not a lack of desire to move forward, but rather that the awakened inner power inevitably forces them to confront what previously remained unseen. This is the profound responsibility that comes with true awareness. For the old excuses no longer exist. The person is no longer able to blame the world, the vicissitudes of fate, or external circumstances. They clearly understand everything that happens in their existence is a direct reflection of their inner state. And from this, it follows that if something is going wrong, it is they who must undergo the necessary changes. This path is not easy. On the contrary, it is a complex and multifaceted process, requiring utmost, even most severe, honesty with oneself. The person can no longer rely on the same hackneyed excuses, on the same old stories they once told to rationalize their own mediocrity. They cannot continue to blame their past, their mistakes, or the actions of others who, they believed, harmed them. For now they grasp that true power always resided within them, and if in times past they did not utilize its potential, it was only because they consciously chose to ignore it. However, if a person is able to overcome this severe trial, if they can fearlessly look into the depths of their own soul and accept the true essence of their being, realizing what they have become, then something far more significant begins to unfold. Their connection to the world around them and to life itself becomes even deeper and stronger. They stop feeling isolated from the events happening around them. They are no longer just a disengaged bystander. Now they become an integral and active part of the universal flow of existence. And it is at this moment that the true, authentic magic of existence is born. Because when an individual reaches such a high level of self-awareness, inner harmony, and complete control over their own life energy, the world around them begins to respond to their presence in a way that previously seemed absolutely inconceivable. Previously closed doors swing open before them, where only recently insurmountable obstacles stood. The necessary answers come to them even before they manage to formulate their questions. Favorable opportunities arise precisely in those moments when they are most needed and desired. This happens not because the universe is doing them special favors or showing them preference, but because the person themselves is finally tuning into resonance with the correct creative frequency of existence. Others begin to perceive and treat them entirely differently, not because of any physical changes in their appearance or body, but because their aura and very presence acquire a special significance and weight that they previously did not possess. This individual is no longer just one of the crowd. They are one who moves with a clear purpose, with considerable intensity, and with a level of awareness possessed by few, and this becomes evident. It manifests in their manner of conversation, in how they look at the world, and in the powerful energy they transmit, even without uttering a word. However, with the attainment of such power comes a new, at times more insidious test. The world, seeing their conquests, will again try to pull them back into their former state, but without resorting to direct coercion. It will use subtle temptations, skillfully disguised as promising opportunities, and distractions presented as perfectly legitimate and reasonable paths. The surrounding reality will try to instill in them the idea that they have already reached all conceivable peaks, that they have already seen everything there was to see. He must, however, by no means succumb to this trap, for the true essence of this path lies not in reaching a final destination, but in continuous self-development, in a constant deepening of understanding, and in an unceasing expansion of one's perspective. The current moment marks only the prelude to an entirely new phase. What was previously perceived as an awakening turned out to be merely the first, initial step. For if he continues to move forward and manages to maintain this unique state, the further prospects opening before him will surpass the boldest imaginings of most people. There exists a level of connection with being that decisively transcends all logic and rational comprehension, capable of breaking down the familiar barriers of time, and which immerses the individual in a state where fear ceases to exist as such, and absolute, unshakable certainty becomes the sole and undeniable reality. And it is precisely then that the culminating question inevitably arises before him. How far is he willing to go? Will he be able to continue moving forward even when it seems to him that all facets of existence have already been comprehended? Will he have the courage to discard even those ideas and beliefs that currently appear unshakable and unbreakable? For the greatest of all truths is that this path is an infinite odyssey. There is no final point where one can declare complete success or the attainment of the absolute peak of knowledge. Something more always reveals itself. There is always a deeper level of understanding, and new horizons constantly emerge beyond those already visible. And only those with enough courage to continue their ascent, even when further progress seems impossible, truly discover the authentic meaning of the awakened state. This journey was long, not in terms of distance covered, but in its internal existential depth. It was a journey within oneself, a deep dive into the very core of one's existence, a direct and uncompromising confrontation with what was previously avoided. The seeker felt the weight of this comprehensive transformation in every cell of their being. The individual has likely already observed how life energy, instead of aimlessly dissipating, has taken on a concentrated form within their being, transforming their essence and creating a renewed sense of self. This renewed person is no longer subject to chaotic impulses or useless distractions that once dictated their actions. However, now that all lessons seem learned and understanding achieved, another, perhaps the most insidious test emerges. The trap of complacency, a subtle threat lurking behind all this accumulated inner power. The mere retention of this life force is not the ultimate goal in itself. The essence lies not simply in preventing its dissipation, but in skillfully and consciously directing it. Many reach this threshold feeling they have gained complete control, that they have broken the chains of passions and subdued their inner nature. But in this euphoria of perceived superiority, without realizing it, they unconsciously fall into a different, yet no less binding, confinement. This confinement manifests as an obsessive idea, an inflexible rigidity of thought, a firm conviction that abstinence in itself is an absolute end. However, such a notion is a profound delusion, and it has never been true. True mastery is not found in total negation, but in achieving harmonious balance. The essence is not in the mechanical suppression of desires, but in a deep and conscious integration of all aspects of being. If the individual stubbornly clings to the false concept that avoidance of desires is the ultimate goal, if they transform this inner path into an immutable, rigid dogma, they will inevitably find themselves trapped in a new cage, different in form, but no less confining. For the authentic quest is not about escaping worldly reality, but about deeply comprehending it from a higher perspective, from a position where energy neither dominates the individual nor holds them captive to the obsessive idea of its eternal and absolute retention. True power lies not in endless abstinence, but in the ability to wield what the individual has cultivated. Now, one can clearly see desire itself was never the enemy. What weakened one's spirit was not the energy itself, but rather a lack of awareness in its application, dependence on it, loss of control, and incessant distraction. However, the individual now comprehends that the key is not to eradicate desire, but to refine it, purposefully direct it, elevate it, and use it as a tool, as it was always meant to be, instead of allowing it to enslave them. The question now is not whether one can resist an impulse, but whether they can follow life's path without letting impulse dictate their direction. Can a person exist in this world without shying away from its pleasures, yet without elevating them to the sole meaning of their existence? Can they live without fearing what previously controlled them, yet without clinging to the opposite extreme as if it were the only immutable truth? For the only truth is that energy has always been present, waiting to be transformed into something sublime. And with this profound realization, born in one's heart, something far more significant emerges. It is a state of serene peace. But not the empty indifference that arises from negation, nor the illusory silence sought by one who hides from a harsh world. On the contrary, it is the unshakable peace of one who has triumphed over their own nature, who has managed to tame their inner elements. They cross an invisible boundary beyond which life energy ceases to be a heavy burden, where desires no longer pose a threat, and every decision they make is dictated not by external necessity, but by a complete and unambiguous understanding of their true essence. Looking around, one sees that everything appears to have remained the same, yet this is merely an illusion. For now, every interaction acquires a different significance, every gaze carries a deeper meaning, every moment lived is perceived with unprecedented sharpness and intensity. This is not because the world has transformed, but because the observer has changed. And it is in this new quality of being, in perceiving, in feeling, in simply existing, that authentic freedom is found. The individual reaches a point where they no longer need external validation of their strength, as they deeply recognize its undeniable presence within themselves. They have no need to prove anything to anyone, for they clearly understand that the only true value lies in what they have discovered in the deepest recesses of their own soul. A person who has reached a certain stage of internal development no longer feels the need for external affirmation, universal recognition, or approval from others. This is because the knowledge they have gained is something utterly indescribable in words, something accessible only to those who have traversed a similar path of self-discovery and transformation. It is in this state of absolute clarity, when the fog of illusions dissipates, that the individual realizes the entire journey was not merely about strict abstinence, rigid discipline, or constant self-restraint. On the contrary, the key task was to remember their true nature, to deeply understand who they truly are. It was about awakening that part of their being that had long been dormant, that inner wisdom which always knew they were significantly more than their fleeting desires, impulsive urges, or the limited version of themselves they had believed in for so long and so stubbornly. However, this state is by no means the final point. In fact, it was never conceived as the end of the journey. The process of inner transformation, by its very nature, never ceases, for the energy of consciousness continues to move, evolve, and propel the individual to new, previously unimaginable heights. And now that one has personally witnessed their hidden abilities, now that they have felt the incredible power that always slumbered within their depths, only one fundamental question remains: what do they intend to do with this newfound power?